Okay, we continue with our series, Living to Eat or Eating to Live. And tonight's talk is entitled, Two Great Tastes That Don't Go Together. Now, let me tell you, for those of you who are not familiar with the cultural framework that I took the title from, when I was a kid, Reese's Peanut Butter Cup had a commercial. I don't know if they're still running some variation of this campaign or not, but basically what they had was they had one kid roller skating. I think it was before the age of rollerblades. I think it was old-fashioned roller skates. They had one kid roller skating holding a peanut butter jar, another kid roller skating holding a Hershey bar, and they bump into each other. So and a piece of the chocolate bar breaks off into the peanut butter, and the chocolate bar gets smeared with peanut butter, and like the boy and the girl, they're all mad at each other. You messed up my chocolate. No, you messed up my peanut butter. And each one of them, this one, digs the chocolate out of the peanut butter, pops into his mouth, right? And the other one, she looks at a chocolate bar and it's all smeared with peanut butter, but then they each bite in and they, wow, that's even better, And then the tagline was, two great tastes that taste great together. Okay, so here we have something very, very odd within the kosher code. Remember, I gave as a general preface to this series that we weren't doing the kosher diet per se, and we certainly weren't doing a halachic, overview of what it takes to maintain a kosher kitchen or adopt a kosher diet. But one thing should be pretty evident, pretty certain to anyone who knows anything about kashrus is that when you talk about the kosher diet, when you talk about foods that the Torah prohibits, right? So we know that there are certain species from which we may not partake. Whether it's fowl, whether it's fish, whether it's animal, there are certain species we're not allowed to eat. Within the species that we are allowed to eat, there are certain parts that are not allowed to be eaten. Furthermore, even those species that we may eat and those parts that we may eat require extensive kosher preparation. You've got to slaughter an animal property, you've got to salt the meat to leach the blood, and so on and so forth. All kinds of things that go into preparation, okay? But they're two completely kosher foods. Completely kosher independently. They came from the right species, and they were prepared properly, and it's the right part, and so on and so forth. That two completely kosher foods should be forbidden when combined, that's something highly unusual. How can two great tastes not go together at all? And that is what we call babach, basa b'cholov, meat and milk combinations. Okay? And that's going to be the topic that we're studying tonight. Okay, before we get into trying to understand what the great Jewish thinker said about the philosophical underpinnings of this prohibition, just a few basic factoids, because there are a lot of things about basa b'cholov that I think that even many learned Jews, or at least yeshiva-educated Jews, may not be aware of. The first is this. Let's look at the three places in the Chumash, three places in the Torah, where this prohibition comes down. Okay? The first is towards the end of Parshas Mishpat. I'm going to get you the exact page, chapter and verse momentarily. Okay? It's Shemos, Exodus 23:19. And that appears in the Living Torah on page 373. Okay? Verse 19. The Hebrew reads, Reishis bikurei ad masacha, tavi beis Hashem Elokecha, lo sevashel gedi b'chalev imo. Bring your first fruits to the temple of God, your Lord. Do not cook meat in milk, even that of its mother. Okay, as Rabbi Kaplan often does in the Living Torah, he incorporated into his translation many of the explanations of the classic commentaries. The literal translation of the Hebrew words I just read is, do not seethe or boil a kid, as in a young goat, a newborn goat, an immature goat, it's the literal meaning of the word kid. do not seethe a kid in its mother's milk. That's where that did it. Okay, you're convinced. No.
That phrase did it.
Did it? Okay.
So I'm never
You're not no
gonna
cheeseburgers.
meet again.
Okay, got it. Now,
So terrible.
since it is time now for the summer reruns, check this out. Sam Chumash, chapter 34, verse 26. Chapter 34. Okay, got to turn a few pages, so forgive me.
459, 465.
Okay, good. 463 it seems to be. Okay? The exact word for word repetition of this same verse we just read now. On page 463, verse 26. Bring the first fruits of your land to the temple of God your Lord. Do not eat meat cooked in milk, even that of its own mother.
It's
Okay, an exact, pardon me?
the whole exact same line, even the first
Yes,
part of it.
that's right. Context is slightly different, but the pasuk is a precise repetition. And then for the last time, where it appears in the Torah, is in Dvarim, also known as Deuteronomy, 14:21. Here it's slightly different. Different context. Although the prohibitive phrase is again an exact repeat. Let me get you the page shortly. Okay. 941, page 941. Okay, it's towards the top of the page. Okay, this is a pretty long verse. But at least this one contextually will make a little bit more sense to you. Since you are a holy nation to God your Lord, you may not eat any mammal or bird that has not been properly slaughtered. You may give it to the resident alien in your settlement so that he can eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner. Do not cook meat in milk, even that of its mother. Okay, so observation number one is that the context, at least, is a little bit better here. We understand that this has something to do with the dietary code. Why it should be juxtaposed to the mitzvah of bringing one's first fruits is a bit of a head scratcher, and it's something that many of the commentaries I'm going to be relating tonight took as a cue to understand the philosophical underpinnings of. This one is a little bit more, at least it's the same topic. It's not as much as what does this have to do with the price of tea in China as the first two verses. Okay, but the thing that should be striking everyone is, for this I need 2 sets of dishes. For this I gotta wait 6 hours between meat and milk, or whatever your custom is, half an hour, 3 hours, whatever your custom is. And most of all, why can't I have a cheeseburger? I'm not the one cooking the cheeseburger. I can understand that a Torah observant Jew should not be a short order cook in a McDonald's or a Burger King. Fine, that I understand. Don't cook meat and milk together. Maybe you want to be a nitpicker and say, well, who says grilling on an open flame is the same as boiling? That would be a legitimate question. But certainly, where do we see any hint of not being allowed to eat meat and milk? It says don't cook meat and milk. Okay. This question was something that bothered the sages of the Talmud as well. And this is one of the many verses of the Torah that are not meant to be taken literally. We know an eye for an eye is not meant to be taken literally. An eye for an eye means monetary compensation. There are many other examples. I don't want to belabor the point because we have a lot to learn about meat and milk tonight. Suffice it to say that only one of these 3 verses is meant to be taken literally. Yes, it is forbidden to be a short order cook in a McDonald's. Unless you're laying off the cheeseburgers. There may be other problems involved. Bottom line is, yes, it is forbidden to cook meat and milk together. But the 3 different psukim are prohibited in 3 different activities, even though in terms of the semantics, in terms of the way the Torah stated it, they're identical. And those 3 activities are, you may not cook meat and milk together, you may not eat meat and milk combinations, nor may you even derive any benefit from meat and milk combinations. In other words, okay, even if I was not the guy cooking the cheeseburger, selling a cheeseburger would be problematic. Even if I want to feed Fido, my dog, a cheeseburger, that is problematic. That's what we call Isurei Hana. Okay? It's not singular. There are other things in the Torah that we are prohibited to benefit from and not merely to eat of. But this is one of them. So that's Talmudically, that is a function of the three different psukim. Okay, so that's the first factoid to remember. Meat and milk is forbidden to combine through cooking. It's forbidden to ingest. And it's also forbidden to derive any benefit from. Okay.
So if I buy cat food mistakenly with this beef and cheese, I have to throw it out.
That's correct.
I can't give it to anybody.
Call up a competent rabbi. You may have to throw it out. A lot of this depends on. Right. A lot of it depends.
Give it to them.
No, you can't, because that's deriving benefit.
Well, if the Gentile is going to like you more because of it, and possibly return a favor, it may be a serious consideration. But you also have to know, relax. We have to learn a little bit more before you know what's prohibited, and a lot of cheese that they sell today is not real cheese. A lot of the things they mark as meat is not meat. You know what I mean? Okay. Here's another thing. What is this obsession with a kid and its mother? I just said a cheeseburger. Now, a cheeseburger is made out of beef, okay? The cheese, whatever milk it's made out of, the chances that the same beef's mother cow is the one from whose milk this cheese was produced is astronomical, okay? So why is the Torah saying Gedi b'chalei v'imo? All right. So again, before I tell you what the commentaries have to say, let me tell you what the Talmud has to say. Some very basic laws of meat and milk that are derived from this. Okay. So first of all, again, this is what we call lav dafka. We're not here to be biblical literalists. A kid doesn't have to be a kid. Okay. The milk doesn't have to be coming from the meat producer's mother. Okay. Any milk and almost any meat will be prohibited. So what do we learn out of these verses? We learn as follows. What would you say if my cheeseburger, I'm using a slice of migdal or ha'olam, one of the other kosher, American cheeses or cheddar cheeses, okay? But the beef burger is not a beef burger, it's a pork burger, it's a hamburger that's good to its name. It's made out of ham or pork, okay? Now obviously I can't eat it because I'm not allowed to eat ham or pork. But in addition to the prohibition of ham and pork, is this prohibited because of a meat and milk combination? No, it isn't. On a Torah level, it is not. Because Gedi b'chalei v'imo, a kid in its mother's milk comes to tell me, it's got to be from a similar species. Not a biologically similar species, a halachically similar species. Meaning, only chalav tahora is forbidden. Only milk that comes from an animal, which is itself a permitted animal, okay? That's the combination that the Torah is forbidding. Therefore, I exclude two categories. Meat, kosher meat, that is cooked in non-kosher milk, or vice versa. Unkosher meat that is cooked in kosher milk, right, is not forbidden on the Torah level anyway, because of basar b'chol, because of a meat-milk combination. A. B. Chicken chowder, allowed on a Torah level. Not allowed on a rabbinic level, allowed on a Torah level. Why? Because chickens' mothers do not lactate. A chicken lacks chalav ha'em. It does not have chalei v'imo. It cannot have a mother that is giving milk. Therefore, even if I cook a piece of chicken, a chicken cutlet, in milk, on a Torah level, that is permitted. You're allowed to eat that. The rabbis came along, they said, well, people aren't so fine. I can make ground chicken, I can make ground beef. They'll say, come on, don't be so picayune, don't be so pedantic. Meat's meat, and that's it. If I'm allowed to eat this, I'm allowed to eat that. Okay? Similarly, it would not be prohibited to cook a chicken cheeseburger, and it certainly would not be forbidden to sell a chicken cheeseburger. Okay, just a little interesting fact one. Before we get to any philosophy, so just some basic facts about basar b'chol.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so let's
Yes.
and kosher goat's milk.
Right. That's forbidden. Because I said it's not so narrow. It doesn't mean the same species that a kid and its mother, which is called a goat. The oral Torah interprets chalav, that's why I preface it. I said not biologically an identical species, halachically an identical species. Meaning coming from those types of animals whose milk is permitted. Okay? But yeah, goat milk, goat meat in cow's milk, lamb chops in goat milk, all of those are forbidden on a Torah level. Can't cook them, can't eat them, cannot derive any benefit from them. Okay, now, I'm going to get ahead of myself because time management is not one of my strong suits, and I always find at the end of these lectures that I'm rushing, to get across, what was perhaps the most profound point of the lecture. So I'm going a little bit out of order. And I want to share with you something from the Marsha. The Marsha is one of the great super commentaries in the Talmud. The great classic commentaries on the Talmud are Rashi and Tosfos. The Marsha, in every classic folio, every classic print of the Talmud, the Marsha is printed in the back of the tractate, and that's a super commentary on, a little bit he goes on the Gemara, but mainly he works with Rashi and Tosfos. At any rate, the Marsha says something amazing that I think we really, really need to bear in mind before I even start this class. And it's a general Torah hashkafa. It's something that's very fundamental to our Torah outlooks in general. And it's certainly important tonight when I'm going to be sharing with you many of the reasons for this mitzvah / for this prohibition offered by the great Jewish thinkers. And at the same time, those same writers and thinkers' frustration that I'm guessing here, maybe there's some rationale to it, but I don't think I really plumbed the depths of meat and milk combinations. And that's this question, very basic question. Maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot and I'm ruining all of my past and future series with what I'm about to say now, but so be it. Sometimes you got to let the chips fall where they may. Why do we observe the mitzvahs of the Torah? Do we observe them because they make sense? They've worked. They stood this test time. Barbara, what do you say? Because we're commanded to do so. It's very nice. It makes it more appealing intellectually, emotionally, and even spiritually to know a time for a mitzvah. But ultimately, we do the mitzvahs because God said so. They do make sense to me. They don't make sense to me. I do the mitzvahs because they are mitzvahs. They are a command from an empowered commander. God is allowed to command us. That's the nature of the relationship. So I'm following orders. I'm subordinate to God. There's a famous Gemara in Chulin, and I'll tell you in a moment how it impacts the topic tonight. Torah says as follows: Kol ma da'asu rachmana hitalon kavas. Anything that the Torah forbade, it allowed something very similar. I'll give you one of the examples of Gemara. Gemara says, "Asa basa chazir," it forbade swine flesh, pork, or ham, as we call it. V'hitalon shivut. I don't know exactly what a shivut is. It's some kind of a fish that has a very, I think it's a fish, that has a very porky smell. There was a big brouhaha about 20 years ago. They discovered some species of wild boar in New Guinea that was a true ruminant that chewed its cud. And Jewish scientists all over were saying, we've discovered the shavit. All this time we thought it was a fish. This must be what the Talmud meant. Because here you have a species of wild boar, and it's a true ruminant. It chews its cud. It's kosher pig, right? So the Marsha says something very kosher. He says, you're going to sit there, okay, telling me all the reasons that swine flesh is forbidden by the Torah. And then you must scratch your head and say, well, if that's so, why did this thing, which is essentially identical to other forms of pork and ham, why is that allowed? So admit it, be humble. You don't really know the reason. Because your reason is inconsistent. If your reason was the true, absolute rationale for this prohibition or for this mitzvah, then it should apply across the board. This whole concept of Kol Masha Asalon Rahman Hitalon Kavase, the Torah forbade certain things and allowed things that are very, very similar to them, that shouldn't be. Anything that's similar to what's forbidden should at least be, the rabbi should come along and prohibit it. It's too similar, you're going to mix it up. Which is essentially, like I said, why we can't have chicken cheeseburgers. The rabbis did it for chicken cheeseburgers. Why did they do it for the shibuta, for the kosher pig, whatever the kosher pig is?
So
Right?
you can't have that kosher pig.
No, you can.
Can.
The Marsha is bringing that as a proof that we don't really ever understand the rationale of mitzvahs. If we understood the rationale for mitzvahs, there should never be this dichotomy
But is
of
it
A and B
forbidden?
nearly identical, and yet A is forbidden and B is allowed. Yes, what did you want to say?
I mean, it's Torah permitted, but is it rabbinically prohibited?
Yes. Yeah, the things that the Gemara says over there. Hey, here, let me give you an example.
You can't have that.
Okay, now if you want to get
Rabbi said no.
if you
Rabbi said.
if you okay, if you want to get ready for some cognitive dissonance, let me give you the example the Gemara gives over here. Okay, let's make this interactive. Think for a minute. Okay, try to think of the most egregious. Let's say there was a person angry at God. Okay, opens up the Chumash, reads about the 3 times where it says you can't eat. Can't see, they can't eat, they can't derive benefit from meat and milk combination. Said, you know something, I want to stick it to God. I want to eat the most incredible meat and milk combination. What would that person do? What would they be ordering at the restaurant? Assuming the restaurant had a very eclectic menu.
Swedish meatballs.
Oh, come on.
Ham and cheese.
Chicken cordon bleu.
Come on. Not even close. A chicken doesn't even come from a lactating mother. Come on.
Ham and a chicken cordon bleu.
Think biblical.
Yeah, that.
Kids in its mother's milk.
Oh, that's.
What can be even more egregious than the kid in its mother's milk? What could be a bigger meat-milk combination than a kid in its mother's milk? How about the udder of the mother itself?
Ah, what a lunatic! That person ought to be locked up.
Permitted,
Treat more.
you're allowed to. It requires certain preparation, but the udder of kosher female animals, of goats, of cows, of sheep, is a permitted cut of meat. How's that? You can't eat a cheeseburger, but you can eat an udder. Does that make any sense at all? Okay. Case closed. I mean, the Marsha's point is being made. Okay. Having said that we can't possibly hope to really understand the reason for the prohibition of meat and milk, and again, udders, properly prepared, halachically prepared, are allowed even according to rabbinic law, not just according to Torah law. So you cannot have a chicken cheeseburger, that the rabbi prohibited. But you could have a mother goat's udder, if you prepare it the proper way. Okay, fine. So, having just said that it's absolutely impossible to arrive at any kind of a rationale for meat and milk combination prohibition, I will now spend the balance of the evening doing just that. Okay, so let me share with you the approaches of various Rishonim first, and then if time allows, the medieval sages, if time allows, we'll get to the more recent ones, the writers of the last 50 to 250 years. Let's start with the Sefer HaChinuch. That's a good place to start. I quote the Sefer HaChinuch, the book of mitzvah education. It's available in English. I often quote the Sefer HaChinuch whenever we do these kind of classes, because he's one of the great medieval Jewish mitzvah philosophers, along with the Rambam in his Guide to the Perplexed, and Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in his book, the Kuzari. One of the lodestones of the philosophy of what we call Tamei HaMitzvahs, the reasons for those mitzvahs that do have some rationale, is the Sefer HaChinuch. But before I tell you what the Sefer HaChinuch says, I want to say actually something along the same lines, but a little bit simpler, from a more contemporary thinker, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. Maybe some of you remember Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch from our great book series. Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch says as follows: there are many combinations that the Torah prohibited, okay, not necessarily in foodstuffs. Okay, Torah does not want us to wear wool and linen combinations. Torah does not want us to plant wheat and grapes, wheat in a vineyard or grapes in a wheat field. Okay? The Torah does not want, and when I say does not want, all these are prohibitions, these are law, these are Torah level prohibitions. Okay? You get corporal punishment for all of these. Torah prohibits the pulling of a plow or the pulling of a wagon when you have an ox and a donkey or a mule hitched to the same plow or to the same wagon. You cannot combine them that way. Okay? You're also not allowed to produce mules. You cannot mate a horse with a donkey in order to produce a mule, or other interspecies combinations that produce hybrid animals. These are all things that are forbidden by the Torah. Okay? Says of Shamshon Farsh, it's very simple. There are certain things that the manufacturer understood, these combinations do not go together. And there are different ways where the interface is forbidden. Okay? There's nothing wrong with weaving shatnez, wool and linen together, but there is something wrong with wearing wool and linen together. Okay? There's nothing wrong with eating grapes and bread at the same meal, but there is something wrong with planting them together. Okay? Here, the Torah forbade 3 different types of interface. And this is what Rav Hirsch says, this is what the inyan the topic, the underlying explanation of meat and milk is about, without getting specific. Okay, I could give a very nice class on why wool and linen clothing is forbidden, because I know a Maharal who explains a medrash about that. Okay, he's not going into the specific prohibition of each one. Why is it that we don't want you to plant grape and wheats together? Why is it that we don't want you to each one, there's a reason for each one. He doesn't get any more specific than that. He's just giving us precedents. You see that there are things that Hashem Yisbarach, the lawgiver, the legislator of the laws of the Torah, who wears many hats, he's also the creator of everything that exists. And he understood that these combinations, these are 2 great tastes that don't go great together, just as there are 2 wonderful fibers that don't go well together, or 2 beasts of burden that shouldn't be hitched together, and so on. The Sefer HaChinuch doesn't really invoke, these things are all called kilayim. Okay? Now, not that I'm one to argue with Rav Hirsch, but I was a little bit bothered. I spoke with some of the other rabbis here in preparation for this class, and it's striking that the halachic literature does not really reflect this hashkafa, this Torah outlook. Because if you open up the Rabbi, if you open up the Tur, if you open up the Shulchan Aruch, any of the great halachic books, you'll find that under the heading of kilayim, forbidden combinations, you have all of those other combinations. They're all lumped together in the same part of the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam. The prohibition against interbreeding different species of animals, the prohibition against wearing shatnez. That's all in one part of Shulchan Aruch. And Basa B'cholav is in a whole different part of Shulchan Aruch. It should have been a subheading under that general category if Rav Hirsch's reason is really spot on. That's what I think. I mean, it's a bit of a question. At any rate, the Sefer HaChinuch waxes a little bit more mystical, if you will. And he says that we know that the Torah forbade witchcraft. As a matter of fact, if you want to know what the Salem witch trials and earlier witch trials in Europe before the New World were predicated on, they're predicated on a verse in Parashat Mishpatim that says, do not allow a witch to live, a practice of witchcraft, a witch or a wizard to live. Says the Sefer HaChinuch. Sages of the Talmud deconstructed the Hebrew word for witchcraft, kishuf, as makhishin pamal and shamala. They thwart the divine counsel or the divine plan. Okay? God had a certain plan in creation, and there's something about witchcraft that's a nevo. Every culture identifies witchcraft, up until Harry Potter anyway. We always identify witchcraft with evil. If you define good as being consistent with God's will, with the Creator's will, so anything that overtly is about undermining, subverting, rebelling against God's will is something we're going to associate with evil. And that's what witchcraft is all about. That's what the semantical structure of the word in Hebrew, kishuf. Our sages deconstructed that to mean makhishin pamal yashamal. They thwart, they weaken, they oppose the counsel on high. Says the Sefer HaChinuch. We know that a lot of witchcraft is potion making, of combining all kinds of things, which, remember, if the underlying agenda is to thwart the divine plan, these are the combinations that never should have been combined. It wasn't the idea to combine these elements. So he says this is a kind of seif, of a connection to witchcraft. We don't understand the metaphysical, evil, if you will, of a cheeseburger, of meat and milk, thanks a lot. But this is the Sefer HaChinuch's approach. It's a kind of a kishuv, it's a kind of a combination that has in it something of the potion making of witchcraft. And he brings two proofs. The first is that, well, on the one hand, I pointed out that it's not in the part of the Shulchan Aruch where all the other forbidden combinations are. It's in the part of the Shulchan Aruch next to other kosher laws, kosher diet laws. But again, we know, over here, it's not the diet that's forbidden. Or at least it's not the diet alone that's forbidden. You can't have the diet, you can't have the meat and milk combination until you combine them. And it's a specific kind of combination. You've got to boil them together, you've got to cook them together. I'm not saying that it's limited to only boiling, right? But there's certainly kinds of combinations. Pickling, for example, is a question in the Talmud. If you just let a piece of meat sit in milk overnight for 24 hours, or add pickling spices or something like that, it's a question in the Gemara if that's prohibited on a rabbinic level or on a Torah level to do such a thing. All right?
Well, I'm sorry, to do pickling?
Of meat and milk. Combination. Not cucumbers and brine. Meat and milk.
Like corned beef, because that's a pickled.
Corned beef is pickled in brine and vinegar. It's not pickled in milk, is it?
Right, no.
Okay.
No.
Right.
I thought that
I'm saying pickling as a means of the taste into penetrating one another. When you cook meat and milk, there's something of the meat, there's osmosis, right? There's something of the meat that goes into the milk and something of the milk that gets into the meat. And you're combining them through heat, right? Using heat to combine them, okay? So he says, that sounds like there's something potion-like going on over here. That's his first proof. Second proof is that alone, and I'm taking his word for it, I didn't check to see if any of the other medieval sages argue on him on this point or not. Alone, he says, among all the forbidden foods, this is the only food that's forbidden if you derive no pleasure from it, no benefit from it. In other words, let's say you totally overcook it. Let's say you cook your meat and milk to the point where a dog wouldn't eat it. But somehow or another you force yourself to swallow it. Or some other means. You have somebody stick it down your throat, you don't have a chance to chew it, to taste it, or something like that. There are different ways where a person could ingest something where there's no pleasure factor, where there's no what we call halachically, there's no hana involved. When it comes to meat and milk, that's forbidden. When it comes to other things that are prohibited by the kosher diet, that's allowed. I mean, allowed is probably the wrong word. You didn't transgress anything. If you ate it in a way where it gives you no pleasure or no benefit whatsoever, you haven't transgressed anything. Whereas in meat and milk you have. So again, it sounds like the idea is taking this combination into yourself, making it part of you. That's what's going on. Okay, so Rav Hirsch and the Sefer HaChinuch are both speaking along the same line. I want to share with you what they say. I'm going to read and translate it. And remember, these are two great authors, one medieval and one more or less contemporary, who make a career, if you will, who their main thing is trying to give the rationale for mitzvahs. All right? They do this all the time with almost all the mitzvahs. And the Sefer HaChinuch says, Zen nema mitoch hatchak, v'adayin tzrichen onu l'moidoi ha'makubel. He says, I'm saying this because I'm forced to say it. It's almost like I provide you with a reason, but I don't even really believe it myself. I racked my brain. I tried to come up with some rationale for this mitzvah. I couldn't. This is the best I could come up with. That's what we call a doichik. When you're forced, when you're in a tight spot, you're tight squeeze, and you say something anyway. That's what we call in yeshivish jargon a doichik. Those are the words of the chinuch. Zen nama mitach hatchak. I'm saying I'm forcing an explanation by his own admissions. Rav Hirsch writes, he wrote originally in German. I was reading from a secondary source that translated Rav Hirsch into Hebrew. Gam im tama rechokim elias nechanim hakadosh baruch hu tziva kach. Even if the reasons I'm providing are very far from being correct, God commanded us not to eat meat and milk, as we said earlier from Nosha. Ultimately, I have to be obedient to God's commands whether I understand it or not. That's how Rav Hirsch ends his presentation. So I'm just trying to bring out the almost exercise in futility that we're engaging in tonight. Again, here we have two of the great commentaries whose stock and trade is providing us with rational reasons for the mitzvahs. And basically, after they give their reason, they almost like throw up their hands in frustration and say, nah, I don't know. I don't have anything better to say, so this will have to do. But even I understand that this is not really intellectually satisfying. Okay, let's move on. That's the Sefer HaChinuch. The Rambam falls back on old reliable, so to speak. The Rambam Amor Nevuchim, I think I mentioned this in previous week's classes, understands many of the prohibitions of the Torah to be based on ancient idolatrous practices, and he says this is no exception. It seems that in ancient idolatry, one of the ways that they used to serve, the pagans used to serve their idols, was through cooking meat and milk. Maybe it was part of a sacrificial offering. Okay, the Kli Yakar says something that I just along this lines of the Rambam that just leaves me scratching my head. He interprets Hevel's sacrifice, the Hevel hevi gamhu mibucharos son umichel behen, to mean that he brought from the firstborn of a sheep and from their milk. That's not what the word means. Over there it means fat. The Hebrew word for fat of the hindquarters and milk is spelled the same way. Chalav means milk. Chalav, you can, even if you're not literate in Hebrew, I'm sure you can hear alliteratively, the spelling is identical. Just a difference in pronunciation. Chalav means fat, hindquarter fat. Chalav means milk. Okay, I'm no grammarian, I'm no Baldictic, but I know that all of the translators and commentaries on Abel's sacrifice say he brought from the fatty parts of his firstborn sheep. Right? It doesn't mean that he brought sheep seeds in their mother's milk. That's not what it means. But anyway, the Kli Yakar says something like that, and the Rambam says whether it was sheep, whether it was goats, whether it was mother's milk, other's milk, there used to be such a mode of worship to idols, the pagans did, of cooking meat and milk combinations and offering that as part of the sacrifice. The Svarnai runs with this. Svarnai goes with the Rambam's pshat. And finally we have, I think for the first time tonight, some explanation of the context, of the juxtaposition. Open up your Chumashim again, if you will, back to the first citation, which was Exodus 23:19. So on page 373. But this time, let's start from already verse 14. Page 372, verse 14. Offer a sacrifice to me 3 times each year. 373, I'm starting a little bit earlier, just to give you more of a context. 373, verse 14. Offer a sacrifice to me 3 times each year. Keep the festival of matzahs. Okay, let's skip. Verse 16. Also keep the reaping festival. Let's skip to verse 17. 3 times each year, every male among you must appear before God, Master of the universe. Do not sacrifice the blood of my Passover offering in the presence of leavened bread. Do not allow the fat of my offering to remain overnight until morning. So we're talking about pilgrimage festivals, and we're talking about sacrifice, in particular animal sacrifice. Bring your first fruits to the temple of God your Lord. Do not cook meat in milk, even that of its mother. Now, besides the 3 festivals being pilgrimage festivals, what else are there?
Harvest festivals.
Exactly. We're talking to an agrarian society, we're talking to a nation that is primarily farmers. There are one tribe with seafaring businessmen, but in the main, okay, the idea of the land of Israel to the ancient Israelites was it was a homesteading act, and everyone got his fig tree and his vineyard, and basically this was a farming, this was an agricultural society, okay? And all of the 3 pilgrimage festivals are identified with different parts of the agricultural cycle. Sowing, harvesting, reaping, and so on and so forth, right? Says the Svarnai, that the ancient pagans, maybe they're the ones who inhabited the land of Canaan, maybe in other countries, associated this meat milk offering, it was a charm for bountiful crops. So he understands the juxtaposition to be as follows, okay? You want your crops to be bountiful? Make sure you offer your first fruits to me. Don't seethe goats in their mother's milk. You don't need that. That's narishkeit. That's silly. That was a pagan mistake. If you really want your crops to be bountiful, observe the mitzvahs of the Torah, and in particular, the agricultural mitzvahs of the Torah. And even more specifically, bring your first fruits to me. That's a more rational kind of offering. We recognize God's sovereignty over us, His power to bring the rain or to hold back the rain, to make the crops bountiful or not, then it shouldn't even be much of a sacrifice for us to give away our first fruits to God. This is what the Sforno says. Now we have a little understanding of what appears to be a totally out of left field context over here. Remember the last one, the third verse, that it says next to the animals that died in the Vegas and the Travis, we understand it's part of the kosher diet and dealing with meat. But what's this doing over here next to the mitzvah of the first fruits? So this is Sforno's approach. Working with the Rambam, he says this is how we can understand it. Yes, Elise?
Well, it also makes sense that if it's a harvest festival, not a meat festival, I mean, you want to pass on what you're harvesting.
True, but you see that the mitzvah of the Torah was to bring animal sacrifices as well. There were two sacrifices that were incumbent for everyone to bring on every pilgrimage festival, and on Passover, there was the Passover sacrifice as well. Right? On the Seder plate, we have the egg also for the Chagiga. So, okay.
But the act is hideous of cooking the kid in his mother's meat. Why is the word even there? Why not the word especially?
I wondered that too.
So for that, you're going to have to look at the footnote in Rabbi Kaplan, because I don't agree with his translation.
It says Rambam. It doesn't really explain.
Yeah, well, basically what he means to say is that it should not be interpreted as dafka. Don't think that only the level of heinousness of taking a kid and boiling it in its own mother's milk, that's what the Torah is prohibiting. But if I take a kid and boil it in another adult goat's milk, not that of its own mother, certainly if I boil it in cow's milk, I'm okay. Oh, so you want to know why it says even?
Even especially. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I can't understand why Rabbi Kaplan interpreted it that way. I've already told you over from the Talmud that it is lav dafka.
What's the literal translation of that line again? Is there a literal translation to the word even, or is
No, you can see that's parenthetical. You insert that in brackets. The literal words are, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk.
That's the literal.
See, he took out the word kid and he replaced it with the word meat. But he left in the word mother. I don't know what he's doing with the even. I really don't know exactly what he wants with the even. Where's the even?
On the previous page.
Even. Chulin, Ramam. Okay. I'm not sure what he wants. I can't tell you. Okay. Rabbi Bechaya says as follows. Rabbi Bechaya understands this in the context more of the third verse, which again, contextually, is part of the whole kosher diet code. It's talking about an animal that died naturally. It's talking about an animal that was mauled, what we call nevela and treifa. And in conjunction with that, it says, it again repeats the prohibition of the meat milk combination. A general idea about the kosher diet, or transgressing the kosher diet, sometimes we know, the sages of the Talmud give us a window into understanding the metaphysical ruin that sin brings upon us. Sometimes not. When it comes to the kosher diet, when it comes to what we call machalas asuras, forbidden foods, our sages teach us that machalas asuras are metamtamim es halev. Okay? They stuff, they constrict the heart. Now we don't mean over here high cholesterol, plaque on the arteries. That's not what we're talking about. The heart that we're talking about over here is the idea of the leiv lahav, the heart as a wise and understanding, a seat of cognition, of understanding, and even more so of spirituality. the mode of worship. You should love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. Right? The idea of Machalas Asuras is it coarsens a person. It makes a person insensitive to spirituality. It makes a person insensitive to refinement of their character traits. That's a negative metaphysical effect of Machalas Asuras in general. Along those lines, he says as follows, a very, very interesting thing. The Talmud in several places talks about something which is, I don't know if it's precisely consistent with modern day biology, but it's a fly in the face of modern day biology. And as we understand, that milk is a bodily fluid, it's a bodily secretion. Okay? And there's something about our blood flow, which is first and foremost the first fluid, the first liquid in our body. Most of our bodily secretions, and many of our bodily secretions, have to do with blood. Okay? We certainly know that urine is formed because it's impurities that the kidneys filter out of the blood, for example. Right? So there's an expression in the Talmud that dam ne'akar v'nasa chalav. Blood becomes cloudy or becomes somewhat congealed, and that's what milk is produced for. For lactating mammals, for lactating animals, yes, for human beings too, there's something about milk as being a derivation of blood, somehow or another transformed from the blood. We know that blood is one of the things that's also prohibited by the Torah. One is not allowed to ingest blood. Says Rabbi Bachaya, there's something about bringing milk into an interface with meat, which certainly has a lot of blood vessels in it, veins and arteries and capillaries, even though we leach some of the blood out of it. Meat, with its ruddiness, with the redness of the color, the muscle tissue, it's more informed by blood. When you combine meat with milk, it brings back the blood-like nature of the milk. It's no longer milk, it's almost like blood again. This is what Rabbi Chaya says. And this causes a timtum alev. This causes a coarsening, a thickening, if you will, of the spiritual capacity of our hearts. And this is how he understands it now. He combines the two contexts. The context of Deuteronomy, where it's said together with a lot of other forbidden foods, and the context I read for you over here, the first time it appears in the Torah, where it's said in the pilgrimage festivals. The festivals were about heightening our spirituality. Very obviously, you're coming to the Holy Temple. Also in the Torah it says, Laman Tilmod L'Yira. You go to Jerusalem and you go to the temple compound, so you should learn how to be in awe of God. Obviously it was a very awesome place, the temple in Jerusalem, before it was destroyed. There are other places in the Talmud where it says the love of God to the Jewish people was very evident during the holidays. So we're talking about two of the highest spiritual yearnings that any individual human being can have, and certainly the Jewish people on a national level, the love and the awe of God. That's what a person is supposed to be able to cultivate on the pilgrimage holidays, on holidays in general, but certainly when you're making the Hajj, when you're making the pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So in particular, again, it's this contrast. It's almost like in the lines of what the Srane said, right? You want bountiful crops? Bring your bikurim. You don't need this silly idolatrous practice of meat-milk combinations. Along those same lines, it says, you're here to get your spirituality elevated and raised. Don't ruin it by constricting your heart, by thickening the spiritual, clogging the spiritual arteries, if you will, for love and for awe through the meat-milk combination, and particularly by eating the meat-milk combination. The Ibn Ezra says something that I think many of you were thinking about yourselves. Certainly, Betty Ann has been expressing her utter disgust at the idea from the first moments of the class. So, the Ibn Ezra is your man on this topic. Okay, let me give you a few precedents he talks about. There are certain laws of the Torah that no doubt would revolt card-carrying members of PETA or the more moderate members of the Association for the Prevention of the ASPCA. What does that stand for? Prevention. I don't know what the AS is, but American Society, the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, right? A lot of things in the Torah that no doubt animal rights activists would be very upset about. But there's certain laws of the Torah that certainly seem to be speaking about not having excessive cruelty to animals. Here's two of them. There's a prohibition in the Torah. You're not allowed to slaughter a parent animal and its child. I'm not a rancher. I don't know how I could possibly know, looking at adult steers or cows and then looking at little calves, whose daddy and mommy it is. Okay? However, there is a prohibition in the Torah that you cannot slaughter a parent animal and a child animal on the same day. Similarly, when we're talking about fowl, when we're not talking about larger animals, when we're talking about birds, there's a law of the Torah that if you come upon the nest of kosher birds, either with eggs or with hatchlings, you're not allowed to just take the whole nest home and then eat the eggs and the mother bird. Shiluach hakan is called. You have to cast away, you have to drive away the mother bird from her eggs and from her hatchlings. Okay? So to speak, that she shouldn't be upset with the idea of you're taking away her youngins. You're taking away her family. Okay? So we see that there are laws in the Torah which seem to address the animal's sensitivities. Okay? He says it's along those lines. The idea of prohibiting the meat and milk combination, certainly we know the Sage of the Talmud said it's not specific to a kid and it's not specific to its own mother's milk, but the way it's stated in the Torah is to get across this idea of there's something cruel, okay? There's something perverse, yeah, about cooking an animal that you just slaughtered in its own mother's milk. Okay? And that's what Ibn Ezra says. Okay, again, this explanation is very wanting also, because we know it's not limited to the mother. And it's not limited to young children animals. It doesn't have to be a little calf or a little kid. It could be a fully grown adult animal. Okay? But at any rate, this is what he says. And as far as the Torah emphasizing Gideon, he said something very interesting. Let me just give you a little background so you know where he's coming from. Let's go back to Genesis. Okay, take a look on page 125, verse 9. This is the narrative of Rivka, Rebecca, and Yaakov and Jacob putting their wits together to get the blessings away from Esau, and over to Jacob. So this is what the mother, the matriarch Rebecca, commands her son. She says in verse 9, "Go to the sheep and take 2 choice young kids. I'll prepare them with a tasty recipe, just the way your father likes them." 2 young kids? You know, I'm a big eater, but I don't think I could down 2 young kids at a meal. Yitzchak Avinu, I'm sure, was much more of an ascetic than I am. Remember the first class in the series about feasting and fasting? I'm sure that Yitzchak Avinu, that Isaac the patriarch, was much closer to fasting than most contemporary Jews are. Right? What kind of a command is this? Bring me 2 young kids. All right? So there's a midrashic interpretation as well. But I'm taking this as a precedent for something that Ibn Ezra says. Ibn Ezra says, and again, I'm not a rancher, I'll take his word for it. He says, bearing twins is something very common to goats. Goats very often bear twins. And when a rancher would have his nanny goats bearing twins, he would leave one of them alive for the milk, for the wool, for propagating the next generation, and he would routinely slaughter the other one. So, there's a lot of meat being sacrificed, a lot of karbanos, obligatory sacrifices have to be brought holiday time. So very often when the ranchers, farmers, if they kept some goats, when they would have these twin goats being born, they would wait until the holiday festival to take them up to Jerusalem. And that would be the time, whether they were bringing it for a sacrifice or just slaughtering it as unconsecrated meat for a holiday, for a festive holiday meal, for their own private use. Whatever it was, this was the time of the year when one of those twin goats got slaughtered. One of the twin goats got slaughtered. The mother goat is still around. It's producing milk. Somebody says, maybe it'll be tastier in milk than it will in water. So that would be an ample opportunity, a possibility for cooking a kid in its mother's milk. And the Ibn Ezra concludes with Genayu, V'derech Rav. It's a disgusting thing, and it's the way of a glutton. Okay? There are plenty of very tasty delicacies in the meat department that the Torah did allow. To do something like this, to bring it into contemporary terms, there are many tasty, delicious beef burgers, hamburgers, whatever you want to call them. Must you add that slice of mozzarella on top? You have to have a cheeseburger. It's too much already. That's stepping over the line. That's how the Ibn Ezra approaches it. Incidentally, the Ibn Ezra also says, one of the Rishonim, he says as well, I don't really understand the reason for this. I'm offering you something, but ultimately the Sage of the Talmud and the Medrash never really gave us any insight into the whys and the wherefores for this mitzvah. And he says, Ashrei Shabacha B'hem Chachmas, I'm paraphrasing, but something along those lines. Blessed is the one who chose them in their wisdom, and they in their wisdom did not choose to reveal the reason for this mitzvah to us. Okay, I was right. I am being grabbed by the clock, but I very quickly want to share with you, move a few centuries forward on the timeline. I want to share with you, I'll try to make it as brief as possible, approaches of two more contemporary writers, 20th century writers. Rav Yitzchak Breuer and those nine L'Torah, the Lutzker Rav Sorotzkin. Rav Yitzchak Breuer says as follows: just as there are mitzvahs of the Torah that are incumbent upon man, there are mitzvahs of the Torah that are incumbent upon nature, or more precisely, that are addressed to man to maintain the natural order. Okay, obviously he's alluding to a lot of the things that Rav Shimon from Hirsch said, certain combinations that are forbidden. There's certain ecological laws in the Torah. We know that right now we're in the middle of a Shemitah year. We've got to let the Torah observant farmers in Israel are letting their fields lie fallow this year. There's no agricultural activity going on. There are many, many mitzvahs of the Torah that are about maintaining the natural order. Says Rav Breuer, the underlying theme of all of those mitzvahs is to mitigate against what we've learned about many, many times in this class, what in the old American West used to call manifest destiny. Okay, I've read the verse many times, I'm not going to make you shuffle pages and look it up. We learned it last week. Adam is told, go and dominate the world. Okay? Be fruitful, multiply, spread throughout the world. Okay? Dominate the birds, the winged birds of the heaven, and the fowl of the heaven, and the animals of the earth. Dominate them. Take control of them. Right? People could be filled with hubris. People could say there are no limits. Okay? God withdrew the administration of the earth. The administration of the earth is totally up to me. And there are no limitations to how I can impact the environment and how I can impact the earth. It's not true. Hashem gave human beings plenty of leash, if you will, a very, very long leash in terms of what they can manipulate in nature, what they can control, the forests that they can clear, the cities that they can build, the farms that they can farm, the ranches that they can ranch. But don't forget who's boss. Don't forget who's in charge. Let me just cite for you two mitzvahs that bring across this point very clearly. Do you know that the land of Israel is the land of Israel? It's the inheritance. It's the homeland of the entire Jewish people, right? We all have a stake in the land of Israel, right? Wrong.
Right.
You're not allowed to own land. Not you're not allowed to. We do not own any land in the land of Israel.
Wrong.
What we have is
No, I mean, you were
a
right.
50-year lease in the land of Israel. Okay? The rule is that when people would sell their parcels, their homesteads, in the land of Israel, there's something called the Jubilee year, the Yovel year. We have now the Shemitah year, a 7-year cycle, and when you count off 7 Shemitah cycles, at the end of 7 sets of 7, after the 49th year, there's a 50th year. In Hebrew it's called the Yovel, in English it's called the Jubilee year. Okay? Little interesting bit of trivia. the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, and thou shalt declare liberty throughout the land for all its inhabitants, is a verse taken from the midst of the Jubilee year. One of the laws of the Jubilee year is, let's say somebody who was from the tribe, just at random, from the tribe of Shimon, sold his homestead in year number 25 of the Shemitah, of the Yovel, I should say, Jubilee cycle. He sold his homestead to somebody from the tribe of Zvulun, let's say. The Zvulunite, at the end of the 50-year cycle, would have to return this parcel of land either to its owner or to his heirs if he's no longer alive. If the buyer is no longer alive, then the heirs of the buyer have to return to the heirs of the seller. Kili kalaretz, the pasuk concludes, because the whole land is mine. Ultimately, it's mine. You cannot buy and trade real estate in Israel. The most you can do is take a 49-year lease. That's it. Okay.
Wow.
There's a.
So how is it? So who began getting the property?
When Joshua crossed the Jordan, there were 14 years. The first 14 years after Moshe Rabbeinu's death. Those 14 years are known in Jewish history as the years of kibush v'chiluk, of conquest and homesteading. And there was a formula, there was a lottery that was first assigned to have tribal homelands for the various tribes, except for the tribe of Levi. They didn't own any agricultural land on the land of Israel. There was a homesteading act, if you will, that originally apportioned different parts of Israel to different tribes, and within the tribes to different families, and that's how it passed through from generation to generation. And every 15 years, you would reset the template. Everything would go back to the original Homesteading Act. No matter how much wheeling and dealing took place in the intervening years, when the 50th year came, boom, everything goes back to its original
So
template.
theoretically, every 50th year, it goes back to the original owners during that time.
Correct.
Or descendants thereof.
Correct. That's how that works.
Does that still apply today?
Absolutely not. We have no clue what tribe we're from.
Right.
We have no clue as to the tribal boundary. I was saying we have no clue, but we certainly don't have precise tribal boundaries in Israel, and we certainly don't have within the tribal homelands. If we know, basically, I mean, there's an area around Jerusalem that's known as Harei Yehuda, the Judean hills. We know that was part of the tribe of Yehuda's tribal homeland. We know south of Jerusalem was the Benjaminites. We know basically where it is, but we certainly don't have the records of particular families, and we don't have our lineage records to know which tribe we're from. To say, oh, you know, you're trespassing on my homestead. No, there's not something that places. What?
We were all from Judah.
All recognizable Jews in the world today are from one of three tribes, except the ones who are, constantly, making claims that one of the 10 lost tribes. They're lost. We classical Judaism believes that their true identities are not going to be revealed until the Messianic era.
What's the third
Rabbi.
tribe? Judah, Benjamin?
Levi.
Levi.
Right.
Rabbi.
Yeah, one second. I just want to finish one thing because I'm about to wrap up the class, and then I'll take as many questions as you want. Okay. The application here is, says Rabbi Breuer, that, again, there were certain combinations in terms of even cooking and in terms of diet where God said, till here, not further. Okay? I don't want you combining meat and milk. There's something about meat and milk and keeping them separate that sensitizes the human being to their own limitations, how it's not an anything goes universe. There's still somebody in charge. I can manipulate things a certain way, but there are certain things in nature that were meant to be separate, and I have to respect the natural law, so to speak. God did not take his hands off this world entirely. Finally, this is something very interesting. We spent the whole class last week talking about how we became carnivores. Right? Adam was a herbivore. Adam was not supposed to. He was supposed to be a vegetarian. Wasn't supposed to eat meat. Right? Now I don't know how much of last week's class you remember. I don't know how much of last week's class I remember. Okay? But we know they were straining last week also. The commentators were scratching their heads and trying to figure out what happened, what changed in Noah's times that allowed humanity to eat meat. Now I want to ask you a question. How do you know that we're allowed to eat, or ingest, eat is not the right word, cow's milk? Ever thought about that? Based on what you know so far about the Torah and about the kosher code, can anyone provide me with some source that tells me why we're allowed to drink milk?
And cows.
Milk was meant for me, or milk was meant for calves. Okay, this the typical milk. You go into the store. You're not buying sour milk. You're not buying soy milk. You're not buying goat's milk. You know. And when I was a kid, the only people who drank goat's milk were people who were allergic to cow's milk. We don't even call it cow's milk. Milk means from a cow. We don't stop to think about it too often, right? Who is the milk of a cow intended for? Homo sapiens or diminutive little bovines, also known as calves? Who's supposed to be drinking that milk?
Yes.
Right? So why are we allowed to eat it? Are we stealing from the calves?
Maybe there's too much of it.
And there's a more basic question over here. You know, Avim and Achai, limbs from living animals, even though we are allowed as carnivores to eat meat, right? But limbs from living animals, whether for Jews or for Noahides, that's something that's forbidden. And it's not so simple, even not a limb or an organ from a living animal, anything, any bodily fluid, anything that exudes from a living animal, it's a whole discussion in the Gemara, whether or not you're allowed to ingest it in any way. And that's exactly what milk is. Milk is a bodily fluid that you're extracting from a living animal. I should be allowed to eat it. Good.
What's that?
So some of the Rishonim say that the land of Israel is praised as being a land flowing with milk and honey. God would not praise his people's homeland with something that's forbidden for them to eat. If it's a land flowing with milk and honey.
Same reason why we can have honey.
Okay.
And the same reason why we prohibited.
Okay, correct. Very good. Although most commentators understand that the honey that's being spoken about in that verse is date honey, not bee's honey. But you're right. The Gemara deals with the question of a bee is a living creature, and honey is something that's really, it's pollen, but it has to do also with their bodily fluids. You know, honey is also a questionable food. I mean, it's dealt with in the Talmud, but it's something that brings a question up. Now, if you haven't been disgusted enough this evening with images of little kids and their mother's milk, what about human milk? Okay?
Yeah.
Is human milk permitted or forbidden for ingestion? There's a nice segue for next week's class. We're going to be talking about cannibalism. Okay, babies is a question of what we call pikuach nefesh. If somebody's dying, you're allowed to feed them pork also. If that's what's going to keep them alive, right? A baby's going to die without milk, right?
But you can give them a formula.
Okay.
You don't have to give them mother's milk. You can give them
What about an adult who either for a medical reason or because of some crazy proclivity wants to drink human milk? Okay.
I don't know.
Fine.
Oh, yeah, I like that.
It happens to be a three-way argument. If it's permitted, if it's forbidden, or if it's permitted only under circumstances. Again, I'm being grabbed by the clock. I can't finish the whole idea, but suffice to say this. The Oznaim L'Torah says, look, milk is questionable. And the way he explains, whatever the pasuk is, whatever the biblical verse that tells me that I'm allowed to drink milk from the kosher species, I can drink goat's milk, I can drink cow's milk, I can drink sheep's milk, or cheeses, or any other dairy products made out of the raw material of these kinds of milks. Okay? Basically, milk is there to sustain the next generation. Right?
Okay.
The only reason, says those nine, one second, I just want to quote him properly. I'll make sure I'm getting this right. Give me half a second. The two are not disconnected, okay? Because the Torah allowed me to kill some animals for my own consumption, so less of the mother's milk is needed to sustain the next generation. Somebody mentioned here before, there's a surplus of milk, right? Not every fluid ounce of milk that's being milked from the cows in the world are necessary to sustain the next generation of calves, right? Meat was allowed. One of the reasons we learned last week was because the generations got weaker after Noah. After the flood, we see the lifespans were constricted. Humanity was diminished. And to sustain them, they're not going to be able to survive on a purely vegetarian diet. They need some meat consumption. Okay? So to speak, it's a shvacha heter. It's kind of a compromise. It's an allowance that you should be allowed to eat meat in the first place. It's only because you were allowed to eat meat in the first place that we don't need all of the mother's milk to sustain the next generations, that you're also allowed to drink milk. Otherwise we would say, well, you're stealing from the little calves. Right? As revolted as we are, by the idea of an adult drinking Homo sapien milk, and what's that for? That's for lactating mothers and babies. It's not something you go to the supermarket and buy a bottle of human milk. All right? Forget about whether it's forbidden or it's permitted. The whole thought discusses, right? Because we don't go around slaughtering human beings. Yeah? A human baby needs his mother's milk to survive, right? Says you're not going to take two compromises, two allowances, right, and make crime bad, right? It's only because of humanity's physically and spiritually diminished stature that we're slaughtering animals and eating them in the first place, and that's what created the surplus of milk. So you're going to take meat and milk and combine it and then have a cheeseburger? No can do. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight. I'll be glad to take your questions and comments now. And remember, we're wrapping up the series next Wednesday night with cannibalism and manna eating, the highest and lowest forms of human food consumption.